So let's have a conversation about forensics, right? You watched CSI?
I have watched, yes, some series of CSI.
Yes.
Riveting stuff.
Right.
Yes.
The one that has Horatio is which one?
I didn't come across Horatio the one I
What is
watched.
it?
Miami.
It's Miami. That guy who always talks like, something must have happened here.
No, that one I've never watched.
That's scarily similar to what he does, actually.
We have to take it back to the station. So we have CSI here in the studio with us today. Yes.
We have a CSI with us?
Oh, yes, we have a CSI. Yes. Dr. Kizzie Shako joins us. She's a forensic medical expert. She's in the studio. Good morning, Doc.
Good morning.
Good to have you in the studio.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation.
Great.
We call that the hot seat. We make it just slightly warm enough for our guests so we can understand one another nicely. And so you can come out and tell people what you do. What's a forensic medical expert?
So a forensic medical expert is, it's a medical practitioner who has specialized in forensics. So that could be forensic sciences or forensic medicine. So for myself, I'm a medical doctor and I specialized in forensic medicine, which is all about the application of science and medicine in the investigation of violent crime or injuries that are not accidental. Yes, in a nutshell. I can simplify it.
Okay. If you simplify it, are you the one who gives out the P3?
Oh my gosh.
I think
Please allow her to simplify it for herself.
she deals with the outcomes of the P3.
Okay, so what, yes and no. My work is, I have worked as a forensic police surgeon, which is the doctor who deals with the P3 forms in Nairobi. We were three until one passed away last month. So what we do is to examine injuries. So people come in with complaints and they say, I was hit here, I was beaten there, I was in an accident, and this is what happened. These are the injuries I sustained, and I'd like to take this case further to court or for insurance purposes. So what we do is examine the injuries and look at the injuries and decide, what is this injury telling me? What can I learn about it? Was it caused by a blunt object or a sharp object? Could it be accidental or inflicted? Things like that. And then we document our findings on a P3 form or a Kenya Police Medical Report form. And then at some point in the future, you'll be summoned to court to give that evidence in court as an exhibit.
And are these, it may sound like a silly question, but are these on living human beings?
Yes.
Or only, or on posthumous as well?
The P3 specifically relates to the living injured.
Right.
So I am a clinical forensic medical specialist, which means I deal mainly with the living injured persons. Okay. Yes.
And you say that there are only a few of you, now 2 in the country. Why is that, do you think?
There are 2 police surgeons right now, but 1 clinical forensic medical specialist. And this is because from the history that I gathered, historically, Nairobi did not have a district hospital. In other counties, the medical officers in those hospitals, in the public facilities, do the same work, as well as other duties, like they do ward rounds, they're attending to other clinics, and they do the medical legal work. In Nairobi, the police surgery is specifically for medical legal work. So that's how come there's only 1 in the country.
So basically the police is using now the network of doctors in the former district hospitals.
Yes.
Previously, that's what was happening. Now, with the onset of devolution, did now the police surgeons start dealing with countrywide? Are you would you be the ones in Nairobi who are coordinating with all the other county?
That would be really nice, but no. No, it's police work is not really devolved. I wouldn't say that. It's still a national
function.
Yes, function, that's the word. So there's just that 1 police surgery, and then now in the districts, in the counties, the medical officers do the work. within wherever they are, whichever facility they are in. So it's not yet evolved, and I hope it would be soon because otherwise there are many people who need the service.
Okay.
Explain that. What do you mean?
I believe, when you're dealing with a living injured, you're dealing with what we call gender-based violence cases. It's, the bulk of it is violence against women, children, most of it. And then you have the assault cases where people were fighting in a bar, And then you have your motor vehicle collisions. All these require specialist skills to properly analyze, document, and package it in a way that it presents proper evidence in court. So I'm looking forward to the day that we'll have a real structure for the clinical forensic medical service provision that will be disseminated across all the parts of the country.
Sure. In terms of numbers, before we even get into the details of some of this stuff, how heavy is the caseload that you have? Are we seeing a lot of cases that then require your attention on a daily, on a weekly, on a monthly kind of thing?
How heavy is the workload? It's in Nairobi because I can only talk for Nairobi. It's quite concerning actually. So over the last 10 years that I've been working in this field, I remember my first day, I think I saw 100 patients.
Sorry, what?
100 patients. 100.
On your first day?
On my first day. And this reduced over time. But then the serious cases like violence against children, which is usually what we see is sexual violence. So there's lots of defilement cases, was just steadily going up. And by 2018, there were about 10 cases a day. And that's Nairobi alone. And that's the number that has made it to that level because we have a very fragmented system. So many people will tend to kind of just give up. So that's the number that I was seeing. And then, of course, with COVID, everything has gone up, but I don't have numbers for that. So right now, you're probably seeing about 50, 60 a day. But
50,
not sexual
60.
violence, just non-sexual violence cases.
In Nairobi.
At the police surgery, yes.
Where is the police surgery situated?
Nairobi area. It's along Ngong Road,
Yeah.
old Nairobi area. Old traffic headquarters.
Okay.
Yes.
Opposite the junction that goes from off Ngong Road towards
Where there's Kenyatta
Nairobi.
National Hospital, Nairobi Hospital, and if you keep going down, you go to community. There's like a junction there. It's there.
Okay. You talked about severe or violent cases that you would see about 10 a day. What constitutes this?
The 10 cases, that was in 2018, was the defilement, the sexual offense cases. Okay, what I would call special cases. So sexual offenses mainly. And then there'd be the suspects as well that you're examining, and sometimes murder suspects, and sometimes child physical assault cases as well. So that would make the number. But the bulk was defilement cases within Nairobi County.
In an ideal situation, you say there is this surgery. What should you have in terms of appropriate facilitation for this work that you do to actually be done to the standards that is actually required?
My dream, that would be.
Dream is good.
I like to dream, would be an assault management center because, there's all this hype about, not really hype, but there's a lot of conversation about sexual violence and the response to it, and you have one-stop centers. But I find we don't really have a one-stop center yet in Kenya. So, and the people, there are people who need these services beyond sexual violence cases. So even the physical child abuse cases, the gender-based violence in terms of intimate partner violence, they all need the specialist, the attention to detail required needs to be one that has come from training over time. And so what I would like to see is an assault management center to attend to all these different groups of people who need the skill set. And for that would have your forensic specialist, your psychologist, your police officers involved as well, a room for your prosecution to give, kind of guidance, so you have prosecution-led investigations. And all that would have to be housed under a semi-autonomous government agency that is tasked strictly to deal with these kinds of cases, the living injured persons. Because right now what we are seeing is very many people want to deal with it, which is great. That's a very good thing. But everyone is kind of doing their own thing. So there's no standardization. And then we don't have, I find that we need a few more experts involved to ensure that all areas are covered. But now you'll have situations where maybe you have 2 sectors involved and not the remaining 2 who are equally crucial to the process. So we need a proper coordination mechanism that will standardize procedures, documentation, training. We have a lot of scattered training all over the place. So you have different people with different skill sets, and this plays out in court because I'll be asked questions like, Daktari, how come you found no injuries yet this other person found no hymen? And I'm like, I don't know. We have different levels of training. I don't know what they saw. So that's kind of the discrepancy that happens in court, which is where everything plays out.
When police officers get injured, do they come to this facility or do they go to these ordinary hospitals? Or even if they just want normal health care processes?
We don't do normal health care. They do both. If there's an injury, we can see them. But they can also be seen elsewhere. It's not limited or restricted.
So yours is for investigation purposes. It's basically when there's bodily harm or injury to the body.
To assess whether there's been bodily harm or grievous harm or maim, or to assess the mental status of a person who's been accused of committing a crime. That's where we come in. We are like investigators for the police, because police cannot touch patients or people. They have to get a medical person who is legally allowed to do that evidence collection from a person's body.
Is it possible, again, we're in dreamland here, for units such as the one you have to be attached to some of the big national hospitals?
Yes, and some of them have what they call GBVRC centers, gender-based violence recovery centers. But again, that specifically deals with rape or sexual violence and not everything else. It leaves out the child abuse, the intimate partner violence, and maybe, occupational hazards. All these other kinds of injuries are not counted there.
I want you to differentiate for us, if you may, gender-based violence, intimate partner violence. How do you differentiate the two?
So gender-based violence is violence against a person based on their gender. And that's usually, unfortunately, 90% of the time, those are females.
Who are the recipients of the violence?
The recipients of the violence. So it's also called violence against women and children. Then intimate partner violence is violence between intimate partners. So if you've been in a relationship that's intimate, currently or in the past, those are intimate partners. Does that clear it?
And none of this violence is we're not only talking about sexual violence, we're talking about violence in general.
Violence in general, not only sexual
including
violence.
Emotional violence?
Yes, it does include emotional violence. It's just you can't really document that. Sometimes it can be tricky.
So just take us through a typical day, one of these days when you're handling some of these cases. So let's just start with a case where we have child defilement or violence against children. What's the process that it goes through by the time they get to you?
So a typical case report, for example, you'll have a history of a child being allegedly being sexually abused by their father, let's say stepfather.
Right.
And then the neighbors are concerned because this child is seen looking, or is pregnant. Very many get pregnant. So this will be taken to the chief, or a hospital or the school will notice that there's a problem and report this to the children's officer. So the children's office will step in, or the neighbors will step in and take this child to a hospital. Then they will then take this medical report, and the medical report generated will be taken to the police, who will then initiate an investigation by issuing out an OB number, occurrence book number, and the whole process begins. They'll also issue a P3 form that will need to be filled by a medical officer in a public facility. Then this will all go into a file and be presented to the DPP's office, who will then decide whether or not the evidence is sufficient, what more is required, and so on. Now, the stage at which I come in is where the P3 is required. So they will then be brought to the police surgery for examination and documentation.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when they come to you, is it on the same day that let's say the neighbors took this case up, or is it several days later?
It's several days. Hardly ever do I see them on the same day. It's several days to weeks, even months later.
So if it's a case of sexual abuse and then there's no pregnancy, so how do you determine that there has actually been?
Well, because we're in a resource-poor setting, we don't all have the necessary equipment to do a thorough examination. But with what we have, we can still find a lot. So for me, what I do is examine, just briefly and quickly look at the mental status, the addressing, depending on the time frame or time after the incident. Then I examine and look for injuries of the genitals and of the body, other parts of the body besides the genitals. Depending on the severity of the injuries, you will find the degree of injury depends on the severity. So many times, especially in prepubertal children, you will find injuries after an incident has occurred. But that's only if it's been hours to days after. But those injuries heal very fast. So in a week, 2 weeks, sometimes you may not see anything. Yeah.
As I hear you say this, obviously there's the scientific that's involved, and it seems like, you kind of have to, you box up your evidence and deliver that. Is there space for you to be connected emotionally to these? And I say that then being able to ask the question, is it your hope that when you are collecting this evidence, is it your hope that anyone who would have been seen to perpetuate violence is then brought to book?
Yes, of course. We always hope that a perpetrator will be arrested based on scientific information, especially. And I find that there's a lot of room for that. But we also need to up our training and capacity building of those who are collecting the evidence. And in my view, I think this should be streamlined to specific areas, because I imagine it would be very difficult to train every single medical personnel on how to examine, document, package, label. I think that would be very resource intensive. So if we could just have selected people who are, that's their role is to just do that work, medical investigations of cases.
Even as you say that, then it is possible to be able to find out a lot of information from the living injured to be able to sort out a lot of the cases that we see.
Yes.
Today, a case of two individuals who supposedly jumped off a building, a child who shows up with injuries and things like that. And a lot of these cases go to die after they're reported.
Yes.
So it is then actually possible to be able to gather information and find answers.
Yes, it is possible, and there's a lot of information you can gather, but you just need to know what you're looking at and how to document it and how to present it and what it means. Yeah, what does it mean on a global scale? What do all the experts say about this? And what other information can you gather from, let's say, more scientific processes, like if you have access to maybe a rape kit, what else can you gather that you can't see with your naked eye? What's the value of photography in all these kinds of medical investigations, things like that?
What other cadre of health professionals do you have in your workplace who also do the work that you do, who are not medical doctors?
We have clinical officers. I think from what I have heard, they do the bulk of this work. And we have nursing officers who assist the medical officers and the clinical officers.
Are they trained in forensic work specifically?
No, they are not. Not as far as I know, they are not. Maybe a handful are.
Where I'm going with my question is that if I look at, for instance, what I may call regular healthcare services, you will find, for instance, nurses who are specialists in ICU work. You'll find nurses who are specialists in psychiatry.
Yes.
You'll find nurses whose specialty is in pediatrics. That is why I'm asking the question. Is the training available? They may not be trained, but is such training available for this cadre of healthcare workers?
There is Training, yes, there is some training. There is a university, I think, that has a course in forensic medicine. It's something that's coming up. However, I know that there are well-established forensic medical institutes in other parts of the world that have been doing this and have perfected it over time. So that's where I am aware of. And that's where I send people to have a look.
Because the burden of what you do, if it is nestled in the capacity of the medical doctor, it's too big a burden for one person to bear.
Definitely, it is
Yes.
too big a burden.
And like with other healthcare facilities, the bigger burden or the burden that the doctor has is more or less a supervisory one, and one when everything else has gone through the system and it actually gets to them.
Yes.
Yes, but this one of yours, it looks like it comes.
You do everything.
It comes from the gate and it goes straight to the doctor.
It's still at its infantile stage here, so that's why I call it a dream. We will hopefully get there one day, and hopefully all those the forensic experts we have, we are just a handful of us, can be spearheading or overseeing or supervising the way in which this structure would work best in our country. Because getting even those from outside, they may not be able to contextualize the knowledge in a way that we can use it.
Kenya's biggest conversation. This week, we shall be talking to young women who are making big moves in government, because next week on Monday, the 11th of October, is the International Day of the Girl Child. So we want to start celebrating those who are making big moves in government this week. So today we have one young lady. She's a medical doctor. She is a forensic medical expert. She's working in government. She's worked in the police service as a police surgeon, and telling us the work that they do and the important work that they are doing, preserving evidence, especially in sexual and gender-based violence cases. That's what we're discussing today. In coming days, we will be talking to somebody who's an expert on taxation, somebody else who's an expert or who has done a lot of work on youth empowerment, somebody else who's in the healthcare space, and somebody else who's also in the judiciary. All this coming up in coming days. Bring back that question.
Actually, I'm glad I didn't ask that question, because I'm going to ask a different question.
Okay.
You know, whenever people hear the word forensic, at least when I read about it and I hear the word forensic, the word that often follows is DNA.
Yes.
And it's become very popular in this day and age because of parental issues. A tiff here and a tiff there. But now I'm going to tie it in with what I asked. In the work that you do, have you observed, for instance, that there is an increase in the cases that you deal with? That is across board.
Yes, there is an increase. Although, to be very honest, the data collection needs some improvement. But yes, there is an increase in issues, especially domestic ones. I find domestic cases are on the rise. There's lots of fighting in-house. And DNA, in my line of work, where I come across DNA is when dealing with any kind of sexual violence, because the assumption is there's been an exchange of trace evidence and biological fluids. So that's where it comes my way. But when it comes to paternity testing, not really. That's kind of taken elsewhere, because it's not a crime per se, unless there's a pregnancy from a defilement.
Yes.
Yes.
But the numbers, when we talk about the numbers, do you find that the numbers, again, taking into account that the data collection may not be as accurate as you would like, is the increase in the violence or the crimes committed against young people, children, women, men? We've already established that women seem to be the greatest recipients of this violence. But I'm talking about the increase. Now, we've already established this violence, but the numbers, do they keep going up?
Well, yes, they'll go up. They would keep going up, because one of the things that I advocate for very strongly is ending violence generally in a nation, which would require proper like campaigning and prevention mechanisms. And this means that violence begets violence. So if you have violence going on and nothing seems to be stopping it, there's not enough resources directed towards reducing it, then the cases just keep going up. And yes, there is definitely an increase in the caseload. Yeah.
And I want to come back to that issue that I raised earlier on the time between reporting and the person getting to you for examination, for medical examination. So in cases, for example, of sexual violence, rape, somebody is assaulted and sexually molested. Then they have to go through that whole process. They go to a police station. Then there's a police station. There's a P3 that has to be filled by a medical expert, and that is you. And you have very many people that you're dealing with, 50, 60 cases every day. Does it matter how long it takes before somebody actually gets to you, for you to be able to gather evidence that you can then produce in court and prove that there was rape in a case?
Yes, so the timeline definitely matters. I'm sure you've heard of the 72-hour rule, 24-hour rule. There are all these timelines. So let me just take you through the process. First, in Nairobi, what happens is you'll have a complainant or a victim will go to a hospital and have there's two processes. They'll have the examination done, medication given. So what happens is they're given medication to ensure there's no pregnancies, any STIs are taken care of, emotional, psychological well-being is handled. Then there's the other aspect, which is collection of evidence. That's the stage at which it should be done, or it is done. Then that report is taken back to the police station, and then the P3 is issued. So P3s are issued at stations, not at hospitals. Then that is the form that I will come across. So because I cannot copy someone else's work, I will examine again. If I find that the first person did not collect any specimens and the timeline allows me to collect based on several factors, then I will do that. But usually that doesn't happen. So I will base my findings on what I can see on examination of injuries and the status of the person. Right. Usually by the time they get to me, there's no point of collecting any other kind of evidence, like a swab from an area they were injured in. For example, if let's say there's a history of being, bitten on the neck and there was sodomy. Right. If it's been 2-3 weeks later, I won't bother to collect any swabs, but I will look at the bite on the neck and describe it and even take photographs.
Are there cases where when they go to the police station and then they're sent, or they go to a hospital, where the people in the hospital do not collect enough evidence, enough specimen?
Yes, and that is a global problem. Because again, resources may not always be available and the workload can be very, very high. So it can be difficult to do everything at once. When you're alone, like you said, the burden on the medic can be a bit too high. Yep. And some people may not have what they require or have the knowledge to collect that specimen, or what do you do with it? Where should it go? How do you preserve it? Where do you dry it? Do you send it with the victim to the police, or do you wait for the police to come? There's all this confusion at some level. So sometimes it's not done, but we are making very big steps in correcting that. Numerous facilities are getting more and more aware of what they need to do.
My thoughts are whirling because I try to imagine that all of this must happen in rapid succession, as you're saying. You can't, it's not like you have a file and you can keep it on the back burner and say, okay, well, I have too much on my desk right now, I'll get back to that. I mean, we're talking about 3 days within which somebody may have been violated. And then if this then becomes a criminal issue, they're now waiting on your investigation and the information that you are collecting to then be able to proceed with a case, whether somebody will then be taken to court to answer charges. So it seems like there are so many processes happening at the same time within a very short period of time in order to get, the answers that you're looking for. How then can you ensure or guarantee that, the processes will be clean? Because an entire case, whether somebody will be found guilty or not, whether somebody then will get some kind of justice for what has been done to them, then is almost entirely dependent on what you say.
Yeah, well, that's a very good question. And that's why, for me, after analyzing these issues over a long, long period of time, my recommendation is to house all this under one roof and have a proper supervisory mechanism in place that can ensure that these processes are seamless. Because you can't monitor every single facility.
Sure.
It's not possible to do that. Not now, maybe not even in 5 years. And you're right that this evidence, because everything we document is evidence, even if it's rough notes, that is the exhibit. What you've written down about this person is what will be presented in court, and that's what will inform the magistrate, the court, everyone in the courts about the state of this victim or suspect at the time you examine them. And I always like to remind people that suspects are not they are suspects, they are not yet proven guilty.
Exactly.
They
Yes.
could be innocent. So, justice is a two-way. It's justice for all the parties involved. So we have to make sure that we do the best that we can and improve on our service provision as much as possible.
So it is asking this on Twitter. He's asking, ask Daktari if there are corruption cases in medical investigations. Or are there instances where people are framed? Some cases that don't meet the legal threshold, but they take most of the time in courts.
I can't say yes or no to that. I cannot confirm or deny because I don't have evidence. But I have heard of such cases where there's been corrupt practice at any level of the chain. So there's community level, medical level, police level, prosecution, and judiciary. But I don't know whether it actually happens for sure. But
Are you able
it.
to detect it? A file is brought to you, and what you're looking at and the person that you're looking at, you can clearly see that you don't agree with what's being presented to you on paper.
Yes, sometimes. Very rarely, but yes, I have seen maybe 5 cases in my entire time working with these kinds of cases. So, and I do try to intervene at that point and just try to ensure that the investigators get the facts right. Yeah.
Another question then, also on social media. Do you have forensic labs in Kenya, those that can do the kind of CSI we see on TV?
Yes, we have a government chemist lab. So the government chemist, which is a public facility housed under the Ministry of Interior now, has some forensic experts in it. And you might see them on TV when there's been what we call a high-profile case. And you see them in the white
Unexplained
suits, the
deaths.
PPE, yes. Unexplained deaths, and they have all these big bags and they're carrying all these gadgets. So yes, we do have a handful of forensic scientists who work in the lab.
We also see in some cases DCI officers. For example, there's an investigation. Remember
Yes.
the case of the young man who was accused of killing his family, and then they were caught somewhere with a girlfriend in Nakuru County. And then you saw these guys wearing the PPEs coming to gather stuff from the house that they were residing in. So do the DCI also have similar?
They have scenes of crime officers.
Right.
So they collect the evidence, they take the photographs, because evidence management, to maintain integrity, there needs to be a very clear protocol in the manner in which such evidence will be gathered. So it's usually just the DCI, scenes of crimes officers, but forensic work is very multi-sectoral, so you'll have your medical practitioners who are in forensic medicine doing part of the process. You have your DCI officers, government chemist officers, who all work together as a team.
Legally, when cases are taken to court, must there be evidence or testimony presented by a government officer, such as yourself, police pathologist, or even in the cases of death? Must there be that, or can courts rely on any expert?
Well, the state investigates crime.
Right.
So when you have criminal matters, you have to have government officers who are on. We are called prosecution witnesses. So we are there on behalf of the prosecution, the state, to give our findings. So you can't just have private practitioners coming in to give evidence without the government information presented as well.
That question about the labs. When we say we have a lab and we have trained personnel who work in it, how advanced is that lab?
I wish I could answer that, but I can't. I don't know, because that's outside my scope of expertise. So I have no idea about how advanced the lab is, but they do work, and these reports end up in court as well. So I know for DNA analysis that can be done. As for other things, I'm not sure.
Okay, a bit of a sticky question here, Doc. You talked about intimate partner abuse, and just a message coming in here. I'm going to withhold her name, obviously. She asks, my partner regularly abuses me. I've not been able to take it forward in the past. What would you suggest I do? Because I'm sure this is likely to happen again. I've previously been told that because he is my husband, I cannot do anything about it.
Well, I'm really sorry about that. It is very, very rampant in marriages or intimate settings. You can actually do something about it. By abuse, I'm not sure if you mean physical or sexual. If it's sexual, it doesn't really matter. But at the end of the day, what you need to do is make sure you go to the hospital, get to GVRC or MSF, and just tell them this is what's happened. And then they document it. They collect whatever evidence they can collect from you, if that is possible. They'll document what they found. If there are injuries, those will be documented. And you keep that form. Please don't throw it away. Many women throw this away, and you never know when you'll need it in the future, because you can be asked, where is the evidence? So you need to keep that medical report. Go report to a police station. They will take down this report. And if they don't, go to another one or contact me and we'll find a way to help you. I've spoken to several prosecutors about this, and they say that if the evidence is there, then there's something that can be done about it. Yeah.
And isn't that a thing? I mean, just like you said, a lot of women don't keep it doesn't matter who don't keep the evidence, don't come forward, because they feel that nothing can actually be done about it, so they don't pursue it.
Yeah, no, something can be done, and you don't have to live like that. Just don't accept to live in a violent or abusive relationship. You can actually get out. I find many times with women in such situations, there's the battered spouse syndrome that includes especially the psychological aspect. And when you're under that kind of duress and distress, you actually cannot think very clearly, and you need help to think. So you need to get to a psychotherapist who can assist you, just process your thoughts and see that there's an exit. You can exit, but sometimes you need proper planning for it, more often than not.
There are shelters where women can go to, and I bring in shelters because reports that I have read about or heard about with regards to police stations, the question you asked is, Madam, yes, that's what I was going to say. Okay. Na meishi muda gani? Okay. So ulifanya nini kukasirisha yeye? Now, you see.
Oh my goodness.
And they'll conclude, hiyo ni mambo ya nyumbani. Yeah, pelekea wazee. Ukiona ni ngumu. I am saying this is what I've heard being reported, not once, on many occasions.
It's interesting that you say that, because of the report today that I just remembered, the national government will facilitate the construction of a safe house for survivors of gender-based violence in Tharaka Nithi County.
That's brilliant.
So I think there are not many in the country as we speak, but this is interesting that there's another one being constructed now. A Public Service Gender and Youth Chief Administrative Secretary Rachel Shabesh said women there suffered violence and needed such a facility urgently. I mean, these are some of the areas that you talk about that people can then go to.
Yes, they can. But it's
almost
always
sure
good.
that this violence will recur.
Yeah. You know what happens, like what you've said about the police telling them, go and sort it out at home. Those are reports I've heard. I think what brings about that response sometimes is that the victims tend to go back, even with all these resources given to them. You might find someone has, the psychologists are there, everyone is ready, the police are ready, the prosecution is ready, everyone. But they just go back. And so everything just falls apart. So sometimes that may be the reason. And the shelters are definitely, we have a huge demand for shelters. We don't have enough. What is great about that is that it's government funded, which is amazing. But it's always best to start at the hospital first. Okay. Then there are women, especially I find the middle to upper class, socioeconomic status groups will not just go to a shelter. They think many thoughts before they do that, so they tend to stay longer. Sadly, but there is help. Just get to a hospital, get it reported, you can get help.
So, Dr. Shako, police surgery deals with what you've told us, cases, the living cases. Does it also deal with the non-living cases?
No. And
Those
that's-
ones now go to the government pathologists, which is
Yes.
under a different department altogether.
There's the Forensic and Pathology Services, Ministry of Health, which has, so forensic medicine has numerous arms. There's forensic pathology, where it's there, that's where the dead people kind of fall there to establish the cause of death. Then there's the clinical forensics, which is for the living injured. You have forensic odontology, so they deal with both living and the dead to establish cause of death. They can help with that, or to come up with a biological profile of the person who is deceased, who cannot be identified, and so on and so forth. So the police surgery deals with the living injured, and sometimes we assess murder suspects' ability to stand trial.
Okay. There's a piece of legislation that was passed in the National Assembly in 2018 called the National Coroner Services Act. This was establishing that entire coroner service to deal with, especially now, the cases of the dead, unexplained deaths that bring in all these issues. Do you think your department would also be able to fall under this to augment in cases that they are living, in cases where you're investigating murder suspects and such?
I think coroner really deals with the dead. I personally think we should have a forensic medicine and sciences bill or act, which covers all areas. It's not specifically for dealing with the dead in forensic cases. That's my take.
And then this would establish as an autonomous entity altogether.
Yes, exactly.
Where the people who are dealing with the living cases, the people who are dealing with death cases,
Yes.
and it's all proper national
Properly-
CSI.
Yes, exactly.
What would it take for that to happen? Is it understanding by our legislators? Because when this was going on, when, for example, this particular bill was presented to Parliament, I imagine that experts such as yourselves and others were given an opportunity to present their views.
Some were, some were not, which happens, I think, with all bills and acts.
Yep.
I think what we need is awareness at those levels where decisions are made, that we need a platform to be able to share our different areas of expertise and show how they are relevant to the nation, peace, security, well-being, and then maybe we can have a way in which to get such a bill out.
Okay.
There's a Committee on Health in Parliament.
There's a
Committee on Health in Parliament. I would have assumed that this is the one avenue that one would use to push such an agenda, but that's a discussion for another day.
Yes.
Yes.
There's a final question here. What does it take for one to become a forensic scientist? For those going to college, what are some of the areas of forensic science that kids should consider? Pathology, analysis?
Well, first of all, you need to decide which area you would like to deal with. Do you like lab work? If you like being in the lab, so where you're doing the analysis after everything else has been done, it's brought to the lab, then you analyze and say, this is what I found. Then if you like the lab part, so the DNA analysis, the toxicology, assessing the drugs within a alleged, drink or drug facilitated rape, such things, then you just go straight into, you can do biology, chemistry, biochemistry as an undergraduate degree, and then specialize in forensic sciences. If you want to deal with people, collecting evidence from the human body, then you'd have to do medicine or dentistry. Then consider either pathology or just go straight into forensic medicine or forensic odontology or forensic anthropology. There are very many arms. If your interest is in crime scene work, like for the DCI crime scene officers, then you can become a police officer after doing forensic sciences as well. So there are very many different angles you can take.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for joining us today, Dr. Shako. It's been
Thank you
very,
for
very,
having
very
me.
enlightening having Dr. Kizzie Shako, forensic medical expert in the studio. A final comment there from Lamek. What is he saying?
Sample storage is very key since quality degradation happens in relation to where the evidence is stored, i.e. polythene bags versus paper bags. Plus, I think there are situations where some abuse survivors are coerced to shower, thereby eliminating evidence. He says civic I think it means civic education is needed.
Yes, it is. Although, there's the assumption that when one showers, then everything is lost. But spermatozoa can be in the vaginal canal for days to weeks. So there's always something you can gather, most times.
So you'd rather go in than think not to.
Just go in. Don't not go. Go in.
Thank you very much. Dr. Kizzie Shako, forensic medical expert and police surgeon in forensics and pathology, has been with us for the better part of this hour. Asante. Come again soon, eh?
Thank you so much.
Right.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.